Alright, what's up guys, and welcome back to another Yu-Gi-Oh video. So today we're going to be talking about sample cards from SDY. Pretty much just going through everything there is to know about them, at least everything that is currently known. Why they exist, what they're for, and how rare they are relative to each other. So let's just get right into it with the most common sample card, the one which most people are familiar with. This is the Sample Summon Skull from Starter Deck Yugi. It's an unlimited summon skull. It says sample on the back from top left to bottom right. And it's printed on OCG cardstock. So you guys can see it's got like very, very high gloss, both on the front and the back. And the Eye of Anubis, it's a little bit harder to see, but if you compare it to a regular TCG card, it's kind of more rounded and smaller, and has a kind of more of a matte finish. Now, just taking a regular first ed summon skull from Starter Deck Yugi, the main differences between the cards are the cardstock, as I've already said. And the other thing is that the sample summon skull actually has different sized font. So this kind of shows that when this was printed, this was a long time before the actual TCG cards like this one on the right were produced. It's printed in Japan, and they hadn't yet decided how big the font would be on certain cards. So on this, the flavor text only takes up 2 lines. Whereas on the version that they eventually released, it takes up 3, due to slightly different spacing, slightly different font size, stuff like that. Now this sample summon skull is pretty common. The main story that's sort of out there in terms of how these were released is that before the release of the game, so sometime late 2001, maybe early 2002, Upper Deck printed these cards, in Japan, shipped them over with posters to advertise the first 2 starter decks, SDY and SDK. With each poster, there was one of these cards as well. So it was pretty much just for the stores to be able to show kids, the game that was coming up, get a sense for the cards themselves and things like that. But I would say that, they printed a lot of them. And because of that, these cards actually ended up circulating a bit later than that. So I've heard other stories of them still, being given out even after the release of the game. And I think that pretty much just comes down to the fact that they overprinted them. There's a lot of these out there. They're not necessarily always that easy to find, but you regularly get sellers coming along who have like just a whole box full of them. So yeah, in terms of rarity, I wouldn't say it's a very rare card. It's very cool. And obviously coming out before the release of the game gives it an extra kind of niche as well. But overall, I wouldn't pay anything crazy for it. It's a cool piece of history, but it's not a very rare piece of history. And another thing to mention is that a lot of people think of the Sample Summon Skull as the first card that ever came out in the TCG. And that's not actually the case. So the first card ever released, which is also a Summon Skull, is this one on the left. Now this one isn't a sample. You guys can see there's no text on the back. And this was released in again in North America about a month or 2 earlier than this sample summon skull, and this was part of a contest by Kids WB. It was like, I think, a phone-in contest which you could take part in, and they gave out 1,000 of these per day according to the flyer. So in theory there are 5,000 of these out there, but in practice it's really tough to find one. It took me many years to even find one for sale, and yeah, I've only seen a handful of copies in my entire time collecting. So yeah, I just wanted to clarify that this is the first sample card, but it's not actually the first TCG card, because that goes to the Kids WB Summon Skull instead. Now, for this type of sample, the unlimited sample with that text, it is just the Summon Skull. But the other type of sample that's become a lot more kind of spoken about and known about in the past couple of years are the first edition samples. So here is a first edition sample Summon Skull. You guys can see this is released later. It's printed later, so it has the actual standard text layout. If I bring back the normal first ed copy, the text looks the same between both of these. So these are printed roughly at the same time, and it's after the Kids WB skull, or the sample summon skull that came from Japan. Now this also says sample on it, but as you guys can see, the sample text runs the other way. It's kind of a bolder text as well. Yeah, and if we just bring out the cardstock, you guys can hopefully see that the cardstock is a lot less glossy than the unlimited sample summon skull because it's not printed in Japan on that kind of hyper glossy OCG cardstock. Now, the story behind these first edition samples is very problematic. There's a lot of different stories that, kind of rumors that are out there, people saying they remember this and that. And I'm going to try and break that down a bit in this video and give you guys a sense of, why these exist and what the most plausible information we have is. Now, I've spoken to multiple people who corroborated the same story, that these were used by effectively judges, store officials, people working at LGSs back in early 2002, just after the release of the game. And they were given out in full decks. So whereas with this, you only get the one summon skull, with the first ed samples, you get the full 47 common cards from SDY. They didn't make any of the holographic cards, so it's only the commons, but it's enough to duel with. And effectively, you would just play against these guys. They would teach you the rules. You'd have to have your own cards you were playing with. And if you managed to beat them, then they would give you a few of the samples to keep for yourself. At least that's what some people have told me. There's other stories as well, people saying that these are kind of more like, test prints, or they're made for play testing. But to be honest, I don't think that's very plausible. And the main reason for that is that the OCG had already been around for years before the TCG came out. So there was no element of the gameplay or anything like that that actually needed to be tested. You would only need a full deck of cards. Like, the only reason to print all 47 of them is for playing with. But rather than play testing, that's for just literally showing people how to play the game who haven't encountered it yet. And the reason they say sample is also kind of, it's a different sense of the word sample to what we have here. The sample summon skull in Unlimited is a true sample of the game. It's effectively a commercial sample to show you how the cards will look when they come out. Because at the time this was printed, things weren't exactly finalized yet. They hadn't got the font all sorted out yet. But this is just a case of showing people, this is what the game's going to look like. With these sample cards, they would have been printed alongside the first deck glossy run of Star Deck Yugi. That's why they have the same card stock. I don't necessarily think that they were produced and kind of cut up from the sheets at exactly the same time. There are a few subtle differences. For example, the fact that a lot of the first ed samples have slightly square corner cuts, whereas the regular first ed SDY doesn't suffer from that problem. So I do think these are probably cut in a bit of a hurry, just wanting to quickly rush them out to stores. Again, right in that kind of early release window, maybe just before release, maybe just after release. And that's why you get those subtle differences with the cutting on the card. But yeah, overall, they're produced in effectively the same time frame as the first ed SDY cards. And because of that, when it says sample on the back, it's not really saying the same thing. Like, by the time this Summon Skull was printed, everything was already set and ready to go with the TCG. They'd finished finalizing all of the details with, the Gold Eye of Anubis, with the text layout. That was all ready to go. And the only reason that this says sample is because it is a sample of how to play the game. It's a sample which is not for sale. So the stores that were sent these were given these, for free, to show people how to play the game, rather than the products which they would buy, which obviously are not samples, and those would again be sold on to customers rather than just given out or thrown in the bin. Now, if we're talking about the rarity of these cards, I think it's important to make the distinction between rarity and scarcity. Realistically, there's no way to know what the rarity of these first edition sample decks is. How many were actually printed, and how many are still out there, maybe in, closets, that kind of thing. But if you're talking about scarcity, then these are very, very scarce. These are a lot rarer than the first ed, than the Unlimited Sample Summon Skull. It's hard to say how they compare to the WB Skull. To be honest, I would say they're not as scarce. This thing is insanely hard to find. But they are truly scarce. Like, putting together a whole 47 card deck, if you're not able to find it all in one place to begin with, takes a lot of work, a lot of patience. And normally there's only like one or two of these first ed samples listed on eBay at a given time. you know, like the whole of eBay, just maybe one Summoned Skull or one Change of Heart or whatever it might be. You're never going to see them all for sale as singles at the same time. So they're definitely very scarce. How exactly that translates to rarity is tough to say, because realistically they printed a lot of these back in, you know, early 2002. These would have been sent to tons of different local stores all over the country. You know, some people said they were sent to Toys R Us as well. Again, it's hard to verify the rumors exactly, but realistically they printed thousands and thousands of these decks. And the reason that they're scarce is not because they're actually rare. It's not because they were not printed in any kind of quantity. It's just simply because no one thought to keep them. You know, they're just random samples. They were used to show kids how to play the game, and as soon as they serve that purpose, the majority of people are just going to kind of chuck them to the side, forget about them, and sooner or later, you know, they'll get lost or destroyed or whatever might happen to them. So yeah, I would very much say it's a case of rarity versus scarcity. These are very scarce. It's hard to claim that they're also very rare, but in any case, they're hard to track down, and I can understand why they've kind of gone up in value over the last year or two, that they've become a little bit more known about. And yeah, with that being said, that pretty much brings us to the end of this video. I think that's about everything I wanted to cover on these sample cards. There are other rumors which I didn't go into with the first set samples. To be honest, it's pretty much a never-ending supply. Every time you ask someone, you know, who has some of these samples, how they got them, you get a different story. But hopefully the information I laid out in this video was kind of easy to follow, and gave you some kind of sense of why I believe what I believe about the sample cards. And with that being said, we're at the end of the video. So yeah, thank you guys for watching. This is Schlost signing out, and I hope you all have a great day.